The last day of death row, inmate Billy Bailey, America's last executioner. Hi everyone. In the quiet, rural outskirts of Smyrna, Delaware, a man named Billy Bailey awaited a fate that had all but disappeared from modern America: execution by hanging. In January 1996, Bailey would become the last person in the United States to face the gallows, marking the end of a method long deemed too brutal for the modern era. Convicted of a chilling double homicide during a violent burglary, Bailey refused the alternative of lethal injection, choosing instead the rope, a decision that stunned the public and reignited fierce debates about capital punishment. But what led him to make such a choice? And what really happened in the final 24 hours before history closed the book on hanging in America? Today, we take you inside those tense final hours, from his last words to the haunting echoes that still surround this extraordinary case. Dear friends, the story of Billy Bailey begins in the small, tightly knit community of Delaware in the mid-1980s. Born in 1947, Bailey's early years were troubled. He grew up in foster care, moved frequently, and experienced a turbulent adolescence marked by truancy and minor crimes. But it was one violent night in 1979 that would forever seal his fate in American criminal history. On that night, Bailey entered the rural home of Gilbert and Clara Lambertson, a couple in their 80s who were well known and loved in the community. Accounts from the trial described a home invasion fueled by alcohol and desperation. Bailey, armed with a weapon, confronted the couple in their farmhouse. What followed was a brutal act that shocked Delaware. The couple was killed in cold blood, and Bailey fled, setting in motion a statewide manhunt. Authorities captured him within days. The evidence was overwhelming, from eyewitness accounts to physical proof tying him to the crime scene. Bailey never showed much remorse during the proceedings, often maintaining a defiant stance in court. In 1980, a Delaware jury found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree homicide, and the judge sentenced him to death. At the time, Delaware law allowed condemned prisoners to choose between lethal injection and hanging, a holdover from an earlier era. By the late 20th century, almost no one selected hanging. It was considered a relic, a grim reminder of a more public and brutal justice system. But Bailey, with a mix of stubbornness and defiance, made his choice clear. He wanted the rope. He reportedly told his attorney and the press that he did not trust the chemical method, and he viewed hanging as the quicker, more straightforward option. Some speculated that his decision was meant as an act of rebellion, a final way to assert control in a process where he had none. The years that followed were filled with appeals. Bailey's legal team argued about trial fairness, questioned aspects of the evidence, and challenged the constitutionality of hanging as a punishment. The case climbed through Delaware's courts and even drew national media attention. In 1986, the Delaware Supreme Court upheld his sentence, and in the mid-1990s, after exhausting his last appeals, an execution date was set. The days leading up to January 25, 1996, were tense. Bailey was transferred to the Delaware Correctional Center in Smyrna, where the gallows, rarely used in the modern era, stood in a small, enclosed building on the prison grounds. It had been constructed decades earlier but maintained just in case. Prison officials, aware of the national spotlight, prepared meticulously for the procedure. The rope was tested and measured to ensure what officials called a long drop, designed to break the neck instantly and avoid prolonged suffering. In his final 24 hours, Bailey maintained his trademark stoicism. He declined visits from clergy and kept his interactions with prison staff minimal. According to officers present, he ate a simple last meal: a well-done steak, a baked potato with butter, and a salad. There were no elaborate requests, no desserts or alcohol, just straightforward food, much like his no-nonsense choice of execution method. That evening, he was allowed to make a final phone call. Reports suggest he spoke briefly with a family member, though the details of the conversation remain private. Guards noted that he appeared calm, even conversational at times, showing none of the visible panic that some inmates experience in their final hours. The morning of January 25 began early. Bailey was woken before sunrise and given the chance to shower and change into clean prison clothes: a plain shirt, trousers, and slip-on shoes. He was then placed under constant supervision in a holding cell just a short walk from the gallows. The prison warden, execution team, and a small group of witnesses, including journalists, legal officials, and relatives of the victims, began to gather. Outside the prison, a handful of protesters and supporters stood in the cold January air, representing the deep divide over the death penalty in America. Shortly before 12 noon, Bailey was escorted from his holding cell. His hands were secured behind him, and 2 guards flanked him on either side as he walked the short distance to the gallows building. Witnesses noted that he walked steadily, without faltering, his head held high. When asked if he had any last words, Bailey spoke clearly, "This is my choice. Let's get it done." There was no apology to the Lambertson family, no expression of regret, only a final reaffirmation of his decision. Inside the gallows chamber, Bailey was positioned over a trapdoor. The executioner, wearing a hood to conceal his identity, placed the noose around Bailey's neck and adjusted the knot to the side, following long-established protocol. A black hood was then placed over Bailey's head. At exactly 12:02 p.m., the warden gave the signal. The lever was pulled, the trapdoor opened, and Bailey dropped through. The long drop functioned as intended. Within seconds, he was pronounced dead by the attending physician. In the minutes that followed, silence hung over the witness room. Even among those who supported capital punishment, the sight of a man being hanged in the United States in the mid-1990s was unsettling. For the Lambertson family, it marked the end of a 16-year legal battle. For Delaware, it marked the end of an era. Billy Bailey was the last person in the United States to be executed by hanging. The national media seized on the story. Some called it a bizarre historical footnote, a reminder of America's harsher past. Others saw it as a symbol of defiance, a man taking control of his fate, even in death. Death penalty opponents argued that the very fact the gallows had been used in 1996 showed the need for reform. Supporters countered that the method was chosen by Bailey himself and carried out humanely. In the years that followed, Delaware quietly retired the gallows, and lethal injection became the sole method of execution in the state. Bailey's case remains a rare example of a condemned prisoner deliberately choosing the rope over the needle, and it continues to spark debate among legal scholars, historians, and death penalty activists. Even today, when capital punishment is less common and more controversial than ever, the image of Billy Bailey's final walk and the echo of the trapdoor remain part of America's complex history with justice and retribution. His story forces us to ask difficult questions about choice, about dignity, and about the role of the state in ending a life. In the quiet early hours after Billy Bailey's execution, Delaware returned to its daily rhythm, but the echoes of that night in 1996 lingered far beyond the prison walls. For some, his hanging was a solemn act of justice, a fitting end for a man convicted of a brutal double killing. For others, it was a haunting reminder that the state still employed one of the oldest, most controversial methods of capital punishment in America. Bailey's death marked a turning point. Delaware would never again carry out an execution by hanging, closing a chapter on a practice many thought had vanished decades earlier. His final day, marked by stoic defiance and an unwavering gaze toward the gallows, left behind a legacy both chilling and historically significant. In the end, Billy Bailey became more than just a name on a death warrant. He became the last of his kind,